Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So we're going to do a couple of housekeeping items, and then the majority of the video is going to be a breakdown of 2022 AEW Metal Universe. Our long national nightmare is over, and finally I get a chance to talk about this product that I've been wanting to kind of do a breakdown for a while. Now, my breakdown is going to be a bit of a mixed bag, so I'll go through the housekeeping items first, and then if you want to skip ahead to the actual review of kind of the checklist and my thoughts on it, then I'll put some kind of a timestamp on there, so if you want to do that. It's only going to be a quick thing that we'll cover. First thing I want to do is cover here, K-Dub's High Five. This is a YouTube channel that was nice enough to invite me to come on and have a chat with him. As you can see from a couple of different links here from old videos, he has had a variety of different folks from the YouTube space on here, and most of these interviews slash conversations are on the shorter side. It's actually under 15 minutes, which for me is very short form content, but it was great. Great conversation, great guy, and I appreciated him inviting me on. I'll include a link to this video in the description for you, and you can check out the channel. And if you do go over there, check out some of the videos. You may recognize some of the names that he's spoken with previously, and if you enjoy it, you can stick around and give him a subscription. That's K-Dub's High Five. Thank you to him for inviting me on. Now, second order of business here, a little bit of a newsy item. I want to quickly touch on it very, very high level. We're definitely going to be talking about it on the Friday live stream, no doubt. So Darren Rovell here, and I'll include a link to this if you want to check out the rest of the thread where folks were reacting to it. Darren Rovell says, breaking, Beckett has informed employees that it has let go of Jeremy Murray and Andrew Metal. Murray was the president who oversaw the daily operations of BGS cards, BAS, autos and tickets, VHS, and comic authentication. Metal was mostly responsible for the Beckett Collect app. Murray has been with the company for 18 years and is very popular among employees. Hearing people in Dallas are disappointed. Now, really high level, obviously on the Friday live, we have a lot of fun at Beckett's expense because they've had a lot of struggles in recent years. And it probably goes back quite a ways. And it's one of those things where Jeremy Murray here has been with Beckett, as it said, for 18 years. Truthfully, it doesn't surprise me that this move happened, also in lieu of a lot of the struggles that they've had more recently with attempted rollouts of the rebrand and attempted rollouts of a new grading system and having to pull that back and the disaster that whole thing was. This is one of those situations, though, because they had the shift in management. They brought in that CEO from the outside that was short-lived, that ended up getting booted, and then they brought in one of the other CEOs from internal in order to take over. It might just be a case of switching up the deck chairs a little bit and trying to try something. Obviously, removing Jeremy Murray, who's been there for 18 years, is very dramatic, but at the same time, I don't know if I would pin this all on him. Obviously, we don't know the internal machinations of Beckett. Regardless, I'm not sure who could take over that would do anything else as far as the way that company's run. It feels dysfunctional, but it's one of those things where we don't have the insight on it. I think it's a big deal from the perspective that he's been at the company a long time and has been in that position. But unfortunately, being the president of that company at a time when there has been one struggle after another, your head being on the chopping block makes a lot of business sense, and it's hardly surprising. I just don't know if removing him is actually going to fix the problem. It's basically, if I want to shorten it up to really this, I just don't know if he's the problem, and I don't know if removing him is actually going to fix it. And I don't know who else could possibly step in that would do any better right now with the way it seems to be operating over there. It's pretty telling when our big takeaway from the National was that Beckett didn't somehow shoot themselves in the foot. That's kind of a low bar, but that's kind of where Beckett is sitting right now. I had that conversation with Jake, 90s B-ball cards, not long ago, where we talked about it. One of the first topics we talked about was Beckett, because for a lot of the basketball guys, BGS still holds some cachet. But it dwindles. It dwindles every day that goes by, and it dwindles as time goes by because they've lost a lot of their luster in that category. And I just don't know if there's anything they can do to get it back. But that's just some high-level thoughts that I wanted to get out, and we'll definitely talk about it more on Friday. All right, that brings us to 2022 AEW Metal Universe. Our long national nightmare is nearly over. Now that they've got the checklist out, that means that the August 30th projected date of release is probably good to go. Generally speaking, Upper Deck is pretty good about you're releasing it within about 2 weeks of the checklist coming out. So we got word that basically the checklist was out late last night, early this morning. So I think about 2 weeks puts us pretty much at August 30th, which is fine. I think in Canada, we might be delayed about a week. So I'm going to say early September for us, most likely. But I think the August 30th date will be probably the date that things will drop. I'm going to check in with some of my friends that have shops and connections to that. I just want to see what's going to come out from that. Now, there's a couple of different thoughts I have. I struggled a little bit with this one. And it's one of those things where I don't want to be overly negative because I am glad that the product's coming out. There are a lot of aspects of it that I like. But if I want to be fair and honest, I think there's some things working against it that, interestingly enough, parallel very much with what's going on with AEW as a whole. Now, I'm not going to bury you down and going to inside baseball too far. Most of you won't care. But I will bring it around to talking about the card set as kind of a reflection of kind of where things sit. That's why I say the parallel is kind of eerie that it works out this way now with the release coming out. This set was very much marred with tons of delays. I believe the original posting of this was probably back at the end of last year. And there was a variety of different pushbacks. I want to say that one of the early dates was in January, and then it just kept getting pushed back, all the way through the spring and into the summer. And as we are now in mid-August, heading in towards the end of August, when it looks like the release is finally going to happen, almost in September, it's unfortunately caused a lot of the checklist to reflect the delay and the sheer amount of time. All things considered, though, I will say that the checklist isn't as far out of date as you would think, given the sheer amount of delay that came out of it. And we've also got some updated images. And I want to give a little constructive critique on that as well, because we got the updated images showing what some of the real cards are going to look like versus a lot of the concept art that you usually get with a lot of these, which is fine. But I don't think they've done themselves any favors. That's why I say, like, the whole thing feels like there's some missed opportunities here, and it's just reflected in the thing as a whole. And I'll get into it in some more depth here. So first of all, if you're looking at the cover art here, we've got CM Punk, which fortunately is back at the company. In the time that he was gone, it was during the time that this was initially announced, and it was unknown if he was going to be coming back. There was a lot behind the scenes in relation to that. So he's back with the company. He's had some recent controversies. I won't get into that, but you can look that up yourself. We got Jon Moxley, who's still operating in the company and still has a prominent space, even though he's lost some luster from where he was originally. He was more of a main event guy, and he's just kind of around the show. Chris Statlander's come back from an injury, so as being part of this cover actually works out well, timing-wise, fortuitously, and she's holding the TBS Championship for the women, which is fine. And then we've got Scorpio Sky over on the side, who has also come back from injury, and is presumably going to be featured on the Collision Saturday show that they've got going on, which has been a decent show. But it's one of those things where he's just kind of there right now. And he was right on the cover from nearly the get-go. So it's one of those things where it worked out well in a sense, but in a sense, it's also going to be reflective of a little bit of what I'm going to talk about as pertains to the checklist and a lot of the characters in it and how I think that may impact some of the stuff that is going on with how this is going to be received. And this is just going to be my perception of it. And I'd love to get your thoughts on it if it contrasts with that or if you agree with me. So scrolling down quickly, now we do have a checklist, like I said. And now we've got, obviously the big thing with this one is the precious metal gems. That is the big draw from the metal universe. And let me tell you, if you like your inserts, they have chock packed this full of inserts. Even going into the previews, you knew there were going to be a lot of them. But even then, I think I still underestimated somehow the amount of inserts. And that's a positive and a negative. And that's where I'm kind of go into this a little bit. Now, I want to show you this because this is from Upper Deck that they provided these images recently. And this is where I'm saying they don't necessarily do themselves any favors. So here you've got a green PMG of Sting, which is great. That's, that should be that should be a big pull, especially the green being out of 10. But if you look on the outline around around his head and around the side here, it looks like a little bit of an issue with, I guess, either the Photoshop or how they did it. I'm assuming, given that we were presented with these scans, this is supposed to be reflective of the final end product. And it just ends up looking a little bad as far as seeing kind of this outline. And it might just be a consequence of the printing and the way they have to do it. But it's just one of those things where you're going to see some elements of it where some of these scans are not doing justice maybe to the card. You have to see it in hand. For some cases especially, and I'll talk about more of those in a second. But either way, like, this is what you're presenting to the world. This is what the marketing department has okayed, and this is what we're getting to see. I'm only taking what's being given here and kind of commenting on that. But as I said, you've got the PMGs as the big draw, and you've got the green PMGs, you've got the red PMGs out of 90, green PMGs out of 10, and then you've got going to have gold PMGs, and then you've also got the retro versions of it. And as I'm talking, you're seeing that is a lot of things that creates a lot of parallels and a lot of different cards. I'll just spoil this right now. I built my checklist for the Dennis PC, the Britt Baker, and when I removed one of ones from it, and I'll talk about the one of ones in a minute. When I removed the one of ones from it, I still ended up with a checklist of 39 cards. To be honest, excessive. Now, obviously, she would be one of the more popular characters, but even then, like, that's a lot. It goes from being completely the Sahara with all the delays and everything, with only having EPAC exclusives. We go from the Sahara to a tsunami. It's trying to suddenly drink out of a fire hose from basically nothing. And I think that's going to create some weird dynamics with this one. That's why I'm saying, like, it's going to be interesting how this one plays out. But scrolling down a little bit, you've got the various base parallels that I just talked about. You've also got Purple Spectrum out of 199, as well as the retros. And then in addition to that, you've also got to bear in mind that there are short prints. So there could be cases, as in the Britt Baker case, where you've got a card in the base set, the low number base set, and then you've got the high number short prints. Now, fortunately, the short prints aren't too short printed. They're, I think, one per pack, so that you get one of those high number cards. But at the same time, when you double up on the characters, that also means you double up on the PMGs. So you actually end up in a situation where you start stacking those one-of-ones early. You have the gold one-of-ones, such as this Ricky Stark here, that is the example. That is a one-of-one, which is a fantastic card. But if you also have somebody who's in the high number series, you've actually got 2 one-of-ones. And that's not to mention the variety of printing plates which are going to be available. And again, I'll just use the Britt Baker example since she's in so many subsets and so many insert sets that she's maybe the outlier extreme. But for some of these other characters, you're still going to get pretty close to that. In that situation, you're talking about, as far as one-of-ones, you're talking about at least 24 printing plates of various varieties, as well as 2 PMGs, one-of-ones. And then we've got parallel versions of a lot of these inserts, autograph versions of a lot of these inserts. You start racking up the cards pretty quickly. So just kind of bear that in mind as we go through. Then you've got this, like some of the die cut cards, like Bonzo Gonzo. A little bit on the goofy side for me, but it'll be a fun card. Like, it's 1 in 10 packs. Not a big deal as far as collecting. It shouldn't be like too crazy as far as grabbing one of those. Very colorful. So if you like that kind of thing. But kind of what is the theme here about a lot of this is it feels like we got a lot packed into this. We got basically all the inserts. So if you like inserts and parallels, you're getting all the things. All this time that you've been deprived. I talked about, the AEW card fans and the collectors being starved. We're going to see, because it might be a situation where maybe we got starved to death and now all of a sudden we're being given an entire buffet and we might not have the stomach for it to take it in all at once. So I don't know how that's going to turn out. It's a question that I have, and something that I would pose out there. And then we've got the merch card, which is based on the t-shirt design. Again, another die cut. So you've got you double up on the die cuts. Then we also double up on the acetates. Now, this is an example where I said that whoever is responsible for taking the images or scans or whatever isn't doing them any favors. And this Palladium is the perfect example of this. If you're familiar with the Palladium set, and I am from the hockey side of things, and they've done the Metal Universe sets, and they borrow basically all the pieces from Metal Universe. If you take a look at this, it looks completely blown out. It looks like there's just, all this white all arrayed around the outside, but it's supposed to be an acetate card. It's going to be see-through. It's actually a pretty decent looking card in hand, but it's one of those ones where this image is not doing it a lot of favors. It just doesn't look nearly as good as it probably would with a different scan or just done in a different way taking the image. And this is, again, your marketing material, what we're looking at. I can assure you this card is going to look a heck of a lot better in hand, but I know that because I've seen the Palladium before, so at least I have familiarity with it. Same thing with Planet Metal. If you're familiar with them in the other products, recent Metal Universe products, these tend to be better looking cards. I don't know if this image is a great representation of the way it's going to look in hand, but again, same thing. I think they're going to look better in hand. It just looks a little weird the way the colors are on this one. It might just be a reflection of the scanner. We're going to have the Jambalaya, which is going to be a really cool insert. But if you're paying attention, there's a lot of different inserts that are, a variety of different levels of difficulty. So you got the Metal X Precision shown here. We did have it in the concept art, but that is another acetate card. So you've got the Palladium is the easier acetate card, and the Metal X is the tougher acetate card. So you double up on the acetate. You've got tons of die cut. You've got the Jambalaya here, another die cut card. You got the Intimidation Nation. If you're familiar with a lot of the other metal ones, you're getting, like I said, the whole bunch. You're getting the Skybox Premium. You're getting the Star Ruby Parallel. You're getting a lot of that. You're getting a Competitive Advantage one and a Hardware, which is an acetate set for champions. So here's a third acetate card in case you didn't have enough acetate. And then we got a gold version of a variety of those, numbered to 25. So you can see that checklist is becoming rather tough, especially for kind of the player collector, quote unquote. It does have autographs in there. You got the silver, the green, and the gold versions, another one of one if you needed more. And then we've got the autograph version of Intimidation Nation, which, again, the scan, I think it's going to look a lot cooler in hand, but I don't know if the scan necessarily shows it off in the best possible way, but conceptually you get it. It's just one of those things. And then we get into the box break average here. You get 15 base set SP cards because you got 15 packs, so like I said, 1 per box. 5 Bonzo Gonzo, the merch, or the Technicians. Now, by the way, Technicians is actually a really weird name. It actually is supposed to be in reference to the finishers. And it's something you can actually see if you scan up here. And I'll include a link to this in the description for you if you want to check it out for yourself. I just had to skip ahead a little bit here, but it says here, Technicians, 1 in 8 packs, displays signature moves. In wrestling, Technicians has a bit of a different implication, which made the checklist at first a little bit perplexing, considering a few of the folks that I saw on it. It was a pretty extensive checklist, but then once you explain that it's signature moves, well, then it makes a lot more sense. It was a little awkward at first, but fair enough. So if you take that into account, then it makes a heck of a lot more sense. I just don't know if Technicians would be the word that I would use for those, but 5 of some combination of Bonzo Gonzo, the merch, or Technicians, 3 of the 97-98 retro cards, because every metal set has to have the 97-98 retro cards, 3 of the Skybox Premium, 1 Hardware or Palladium acetate, so you're guaranteed an acetate per box, 1 Planet Metal, 1 Feeling the Love, Intimidation Nation, or Shut Up the Heat. So you're going to get tons of inserts. There will be plenty of inserts in a box. I think it'll be good for breaks from that perspective. I'm just curious with the sheer quantity. And there's a lot of these inserts that are really tough odds. Some of these cards are just going to be tough to come by, and I'm not even taking into account the retail exclusives, and I'm not taking into account the e-pack, which is a different issue entirely. I just don't want this. I don't want this video to be an hour long, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. I'm just saying e-pack is also going to be a consideration for someone who's considering breaking the boxes, because it's something you have to factor in, because some of the big hits are not going to be in those boxes. They're going to be in e-pack. But I'll just leave it at that. Now we get into the checklist here. We've got the base set checklist of 100 cards, and then we're going to have the 50 short prints as well. We got to remember that for the high number series. Most of this checklist looks pretty solid. Obviously, as a result of the amount of time that has gone by, you're missing out on some of the changes that have happened. And unfortunately, I think this is where I kind of will draw the parallel here for you. This comes at a weird time in AEW, because right now AEW is going to be heading into, very shortly, the biggest show it's ever had in a couple of weeks here. I want to show you here on this from WrestleTix. It's the All-In show at Wembley Stadium. It's going to be on August the 27th, so 10 days from the time I'm recording this video. And right now, as of the 13th, so about 4 days ago, they had already surpassed 80,000 sold tickets. So on the one hand, that's amazing. That's a gigantic show, a stadium show, a showcase show, the biggest show they've ever done, one of the biggest wrestling cards and shows, well, I should say wrestling shows of all time, and one of the biggest wrestling gates of all time. All of these things that they're going to be touting, no doubt you'll hear about them if you're in those circles. And they're about to cross past WrestleMania 32, which was a gigantic show for WWE. That all these things are going to be really good. And that's where I said a little earlier, there's a weird parallel between this set and what's going on with AEW itself. I just named off a really amazing thing that's going to happen. But I'm going to tell you what's going to be weird about this as the card has started to come together. It's a good card. And I believe that this All-In show is going to be a good show. And I think the crowd is going to be very good for this show. I'm just concerned that it's going to be merely good when a show of this kind that is a showcase. This is an opportunity for the brand of AEW to sell itself at a time when it's kind of at a bit of a lull, otherwise, creatively. It's an opportunity for them to really showcase and show out and be, send a real statement. I just feel like the show looks like it's just going to be good. And the problem is a good show coming out of this is not going to be remembered for anything more than the spectacle of the size of the audience. And the problem is when you rely on the glitz and the glamour, and that's all you got, and the substance isn't quite there, that's where you run into a bit of a problem, because you had an opportunity to put an exclamation point and then propel yourself forward with all this momentum, and it's just not there. And now, so I said, interesting parallel, because now getting over to this product was delayed such a long time. And I'm not pinning this all at the feet of Upper Deck, but it's a reality of where we are right now. PMGs are going to be a big draw for this. The problem is the demand and desire enough to revitalize itself after being left starving for so long? I talked about the starvation of kind of the audience, the fan base. There's been a lot of frustration, and I pay attention to a lot of these different venues, and it's not everything, obviously. And like I said, the PMGs in and of themselves are going to be a draw. But it's very similar to that thing that I said about the stadium show. The fact that you're going to have 80,000 is going to be a draw in and of itself. Without the card, they sold those tickets without even knowing who was going to be on it and what the matches were and all those things. Well, here we go talking about this checklist. We hadn't even seen the checklist, but you got PMGs. So the argument is, well, you got PMGs, you got Intimidation Nation, you got the Jambalayas, you got all this stuff that's going to be coming. And I have no doubt that's going to be very enticing for a lot of folks. But like I said, we're going from a desert to a tsunami. We're going from, basically not having anything to drink to trying to drink from a fire hose all at once. It's going to be very interesting to see how that dynamic is received, because I think a lot of people are probably a little bit frustrated, and it's going to lead to some trepidation, I think. And that's just my take, my opinion, and I'm curious if others share that. Now, looking at the checklist and reflecting on it, it's kind of the same issue. The issue that AEW is having with the fact that it's kind of a little bit stale, it's kind of at an even keel right now. It's not really firing on all cylinders anymore. A lot of the big hits that would have been big hits at the time that this product was originally going to come out, a lot of them have cooled off. You got Wardlow here, which would have been a big pull. I think there's still an audience. I think it's still a fan base for him. People are probably still going to collect the cards. But Wardlow's not really around TV anymore. Several of these wrestlers here are still around the company, but they might be on ROH. You take Athena, you take some of the other ones. Some of them have obviously changed championships. If you like Red Velvet, she's actually in a lot of different insert sets, so I just want to point that out. But she's barely been on TV. And I could use that example for a lot of different folks here on this checklist. So you kind of have to start filling it out with folks that, if you look at the television show today, are barely there. And it's one of those things where you just haven't seen them. Like the Bunny here, literally just got back on TV this past week and had been off for a while. And kind of an associate of the Bunny, Penelope Ford, also came back as a result of the fact that the money came back. And they got on TV, which is the first time in, I think, over 6 months. So funny enough, at the time of maybe the original release, she would have been around, but then she was gone for a while. Emi Sakura is not really around. Maybe she's in ROH, I'm not sure. But the point is, like, if I'm watching AEW television, Dynamite, or now Collision, there's a lot of these folks that I'm not seeing on a regular basis. So they're not going to be big hits necessarily, unless you've got that, niche fan base. On the other hand, you're going to have somebody like Danhausen who has a nice group of fans. So you got Fanhausens for Danhausen. I think that'll be cool. But like I said, there's some good stuff in this checklist, but there's a lot of just, okay, or just, yeah, that's kind of cool. There's going to be that pocket, that niche. I just don't know if that's going to be necessarily the audience that's going to make them overly excited. Imagine you pull a PMG of, a one-of-one PMG of Tony Nese. I think Tony Nese is a fantastic wrestler, but he's just there. We don't really see him that much or that often. I don't know if the one-on-one PMG of Excalibur. We can pick any of these people that I'm listing off here. I'm picking on these specific ones because somebody's going to get that hit. And it's not necessarily going to be the big one that people are going to look for. And you're going to have a lot of that. And some of it is, like I said, the nature of the delay. You had to make this checklist how long ago, and it's reflected in that fact. But great example of this, Anthony Ogogo. Even if you're a big AEW fan, do you remember Anthony Ogogo? I do. But Anthony Ogogo didn't have much of a run. And this might be his first and only AEW card. And because I don't know if he's even still with the company. It's an interesting kind of outlier in that kind of thing. It's kind of fascinating. And imagine now there is going to be a gold PMG of Anthony Ogogo. And he's kind of an interesting page in AEW history that you kind of had to have been around for. You literally had to be there. Otherwise, you might not know who that is when the time comes. Jamie Hayter is obviously extremely popular. I think that card will be a big hit, even though she's injured, and I think she'll be out through the rest of the year. So some of that's just bad timing, bad luck. Stuff happens. But there's a lot of folks here who are kind of in that space right now where they're just, they're in flux. They're in purgatory, even if they're still with the company. And in some cases, they're not. Now, moving forward into the high series, we end up doubling up a lot. We got Riho, we got Sting, we got Tamelo, we got Jamie Hayter, we got Britt Baker, and Penelope Ford, and Ruby Soho, and Preston Vance. And there's a lot of them where in the first place, I might be questioning, Preston Vance is around, but again, a little bit here and there. I think, again, maybe Ring of Honor. And we've got them doubled up in the high series. I just don't know if there's enough depth in the roster, even at this point, to justify the high series. But again, I'm not composing the checklist. So it's one of those things where I understand it. But again, it creates a situation where you're doubling up the number of PMGs and parallels and things that people can pull. But it ends up being like, oh, it's the same character, but no, this is the high series version in addition to the base version. So I don't know. That's just kind of my thought on it. I think it's kind of neat that you got Layla Hirsch in there. I think Layla Hirsch might be an example of somebody who maybe is only in the high series, because I recall when I was scanning, maybe there's one or two of those, but it creates kind of this interesting, weird thing. But for others, it doubles them up. All right, now skipping ahead a little bit so we don't spend too much time on this. You got your Precious Metal Gem set checklist. I talked about the PMG versions. Red out of 90 copies, green out of 10 copies, gold out of 101s. If you're familiar with PMGs, you've seen one, you've seen them all, you understand how that works. There's also the 97, 98, version of that with the appropriate PMGs as well. And then you follow into the auto parallels checklist. The odds of pulling an autograph are 1 in 75 packs. I think it's 15 packs per box, so I think it's 1 in every 6 boxes or so. And you've also got parallels of those, so you can see some of the odds. Again, I'll include a link to this so you can check it out for yourself. Most of them are pretty tough to pull, and some of them are even tougher. Now, scrolling forward, you got the autograph parallel versions of various inserts. So you got the Feeling of Love autographs checklist, the Intimidation Nation autograph checklist, 1 in 25 copies for a lot of these. We got the Skybox Premium Star Sapphires autograph checklist. That's a mouthful. And most of those are pretty tough. These are in blaster packs, so you've got those as blaster exclusives. So, that's great to give the blaster something to make it interesting. So I'll just go through anything notable. 97, 98 retro checklist. You've got 50 cards in there. And again, you're going to have PMGs of those as well. So you can see how the checklist of parallels starts to get a little bit bloated for some of these characters. Then you got the Bonzo Gonzo, but that also has a gold version out of 25. So that's kind of interesting. I'll put it that way. Competitive Advantage. So here's an 18 card set. Competitive Advantage. 1 in 600 packs in hobby or e-pack. Now, Competitive Advantage, I'm not too familiar with the story behind it, and I'll try to find out more about it. But here's an interesting case. You've got an 18-person checklist here. And in the 18-person checklist is Frankie Kazarian. Now, Frankie Kazarian's no longer with AEW. And again, you had to make this checklist so long ago. I don't blame you for having some people that are maybe no longer with the company or maybe injured or whatever the case may be. But I'm not sure how Frankie Kazarian would have gotten on this checklist even when he was on television. He wasn't really a prominently featured player. And you've only got 18 cards in this checklist. So that would be one of the more perplexing ones where I don't understand why. Frankie Kazarian is in this checklist, other than just to have somebody else in there. I feel like there were maybe other choices that might have made more sense, even at that time. But that's not for me to answer. I'm just kind of curious about that one. So there are some perplexing choices, is the way that I would put it in some of these checklists, and that's kind of what I come to. For the hardware set checklist, which is one of the acetate cards, and you've got the gold spectrum version as well. You got Jungle Boy Jack Perry, who's going to be a tag team champion at that time, which is fine. That's reflective of the time period. I think it's kind of neat that you do have a lot of the women's champions. You got Britt Baker, Hikaru Shida, who is now again champion. So it works out from a time-wise standpoint. It actually worked out the delay that now she's champion again, heading into the big stadium show. So at least temporarily, she qualifies here again, even beyond the first time. It's just kind of interesting the way a lot of that worked out. The Intimidation Nation, you can imagine kind of how that works out. Jambalaya, I think, is going to be a really cool set for people to try to put together. 1 in 720 packs to get them, and 1 in 2,160 in the blaster. I think those are going to be super popular. Again, there is definitely a love fest here with Red Velvet. I'm not sure how in a 20-card checklist Red Velvet ended up in the Jambalaya set checklist. I don't know why. I'm not criticizing. I'm just curious how, why, out of the choices that were available. You have a pretty extensive checklist. I'm not sure why. The Metal X checklist is 1 in 240 packs, which is pretty tough. 1 in 6,000 in the blaster, which is really crazy. You've got a 50-card checklist here, so you've got quite a number of people definitely to fit in here. The Palladium one has 30 cards in the set, Planet Metal. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else specifically that stands out to me that I wanted to talk about. So this was the Technicians one that I talked about a little bit. Once I found out it was the finishers, it made a lot more sense to me. But initially, when I was first thinking Technicians, I'm like, well, when I'm thinking of Technicians, I'm thinking of guys like Bryan Danielson or Kenny Omega or even Malachi Black. And beyond that point, even Danny Garcia would make a lot of sense in that. But some of them are like, I don't know if this person's a technician per se. Alex Reynolds, I don't know, great wrestler, but I don't know if he's a technician. But then if you say finishers, I'm like, okay, fine, finishers. That makes more sense to me. Now, scrolling here ahead a little bit, the merch checklist, I'm gonna say it here. I just feel like there's too much. Really. I talked about how it bloated the checklist quite a bit, and I'll just show you as an example. I put one in Google Sheets just for myself. So just to give you a contrast and comparison, I don't need to zoom in too much because you can get the general idea. The first 2 lines here are all I had left to collect from Upper Deck cards of AEW for Britt Baker. And that includes everything except 1 of 1s. I don't count 1 of 1s on these checklists because it's redundant. You've either got it or you don't. So I was down to 2 cards. All that was left for me was from the inaugural series, the Pyro parallel out of the Pyro autograph parallel out of 25, and the Dynamite parallel out of 5, and autograph as well. And that is for the base card, because she had a card of the base, and then she had for the magazine subset, which I have the out of 25 and the out of 5 for, and I also have the out of 5 and the out of 25 for the 2022 series. But now looking at Metal, you can see here that I have added now another 39 cards, again removing all the 1 of 1s. So Britt Baker alone composes of, I want to say, almost 30 1 of 1s if we include printing plates of various varieties and all that. It becomes this big, gigantic, bloated checklist for this one character. Now, that's not going to be the case for all the characters, but it's one of those situations where I almost feel like additional card sets, like having 3 different acetate inserts, having a bunch of different die-cut inserts. We love the inserts, but at the same time, it's like, if there are just so many versions and so many variants, does it lose some of the specialness? That's kind of an open question. I just put it as a question mark. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts would be on that. But I'm just looking at this checklist and I'm saying, like, I feel like some of this stuff could have been left on the cutting room floor. I just don't know if maybe the expectation is that they're not necessarily going to, maybe or maybe not, there'll be a second series of this. And if there isn't, well, then you got everything out in one shot. So I can't blame you for that. But at the same time, just looking at it, I go, well, you got this die cut, you got this acetate, you got another die cut, another acetate, you got printing plates, you got 1 of 1s over here, you've got this parallel, you've got that parallel. And none of this even takes into account Allure, which hasn't happened yet, or 2023 flagship, which hasn't happened yet, which have all been pushed back as well. So at some point, in theory, before the end of the year, which is already in mid-August, almost September, are we going to squeeze in 2 more sets before the end of the year with the time that's left? Basically in September, and then 2 more sets after that, and then EPAC comes out for this, and again, it's going to feel like an avalanche after this long drought that we had, if that turns out to be the case. And Allure is going to have more parallels. So you're already getting a taste of what is going to be like the beginning. Again, I use this example as an extreme of somebody who's in a lot of inserts and subsets. That's 39 more cards. This checklist went from 2 to 41 in one series. And I'm not even counting Allure. which is going to have a bunch more cards that are going to be coming down the pipeline. It feels like too much. It's one of those things where like, I'm glad that we have it. I'm glad that it's going to create a chase. I'm just curious if maybe the current status of where AEW is sitting, plus this long delay, plus a lot of those elements that I brought into play that I talked about earlier, does this in fact hurt this release? Is PMGs enough to overcome that? So you've got the PMGs, but then you've got this checklist that has a bunch of like folks that would have been pretty hot at the end of last year, beginning of the year, and now we're all these months after the fact, and some of them aren't even being featured. And some of those are going to be your big hits. And the question is that enough to keep the excitement, the momentum? Because I've seen it. As far as resale on a lot of the big inserts from some of the other series, from Spectrum, from the other tougher parallels and tougher inserts, you've seen the price steadily come down as people got their hands on the cards they wanted. But also at the same time, a lot of the enthusiasm for it seems to have waned. A lot of the discussion on podcasts and shows dedicated to wrestling cards, talking about AEW, it's like, oh, they haven't released anything in a while. Oh, there's just the EPAC exclusives. Oh, when's the next set coming up? Well, after a while, people stop asking. And then once people start asking, it's like, well, you've kind of lost some of the room. So the question is, I talked about that starvation analogy. Did you starve people? There's something to be said for leaving people wanting more and leaving them a little bit hungry for it. But did it become a point where all these delays made them hungry to the point they starved to death? And they're just not there now when you finally are ready to give them the thing that they've been waiting for. And that's going to be the question that I'm going to have for that. Because again, even in addition to all these inserts, you also have like a gold version. So you got this merch checklist, this merch set, the merch based on those t-shirt designs with the die cut. I'm not super excited about it, but I have somebody in the set, so I'm going to collect it. But then there's a gold version out of 25, and I'm sitting there looking at it like, a gold version? Did it also need a gold version? Did we have to have a gold version for all of them? Again, just maybe player collecting problems. At a certain point, I don't need more just for the sake of more. That's just me. Turn up the heat again. Same thing, gold parallel and a printing plate version on these as well. And with that, we finally reached the bottom of the checklist. There's a lot. And one thing that Cardboard Connection has is that you can actually get access to the Excel spreadsheet, which is actually really handy. I do enjoy using it. It's actually very nice. And it allows you to sort through and find your different characters that you're interested in. There are a lot of cards there in that checklist. So it's very interesting to see the amount of iterations and variations. I am happy that they are including some of these characters who maybe aren't getting as much attention, so that folks that do want to collect them are having a chance to. I am excited to see the PMGs and see how well they're executed and see how some of them look. One thing that I would kind of caution is that since they're PMGs, you can pretty much assume there's going to be some condition sensitivity issues, probably a lot of chipping. I wouldn't expect super high grades on the PMGs, and any that do have super high grades are probably going to be at a premium. So I'll be curious. Now, with all that said, scrolling back up here, it is cool that they're going to bring in the Jambalayas. The PMGs are not nearly as exciting to me as something like the Jambalayas, which I just think they're cool looking cards. The Intimidation Nation, I think the actual cards will look better than that. I'm glad they got some autographs, the Planet Metals and all that, the Palladiums and all that would be. Some of these die cuts I can do without, but that's a personal preference. But I'm curious if you're interested in a lot of what's coming out. If you are someone who collects wrestling cards, are you excited about this? Or has it been too long? Has it lost some of the luster for you? I think where I'm sitting on it is that originally I wanted to open a couple boxes. I think for me it's going to be something where I'm going to take a more wait and see approach. I'm probably going to stick to singles, and I may sit back and wait. I may participate in some breaks, and that'll be something that I'll be keeping an eye out on because I'm genuinely curious how that one's going to play out. And that's something that I don't know. And we'll have to see where things sit as far as that point is concerned, and also how the market takes to it. Do people buy a lot of the boxes out of the gate? Does that push up the secondary market price? Or do things just kind of sit? Because the last set pretty much kind of just rolled out normally, and then eventually the price started coming down on it, and it stayed pretty under control. Because like I said, I think a lot of the hype has cooled off on a lot of this at this point. So that's kind of my overall take, my perception on it. I know it probably sounded like I was really down on it. I am happy that the product is coming out. I am excited to go after some of these singles, but I am going to proceed cautiously just because I don't really want to overcommit to it. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the circumstances have meant that a lot of the momentum that it once would have had is kind of slowed down. So it's one of those things where, honestly, as a bargain hunter, it's actually a really good opportunity because I'm probably going to be looking at buy prices that are much lower than they would have been 6 months ago. And how aggressively I'm going to pursue some of them is going to be reflective of that as well. So I've got the checklist, but it doesn't mean that I have to go after it on day one. So with all that said, curious what your thoughts would be on this, if it's of any interest to you. And if you sat around and listened to it to this point, there's got to be some interest for it from your perspective, either for AEW or wrestling cards in general. But I'd be curious what the consensus is and what the thoughts are about where things sit at this point. I'll include a link to the Cardboard Connection one. I'll also include a link to the Darren Rovell tweet, as well as K-Dub's High Five, the YouTube channel, since it covers everything that was included in the video. More videos coming up on the channel, live streams on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, where we'll talk about different things going on, including maybe the shuffling around at Beckett and anything else that comes up that we want to chat about. And that'll be it for me for now. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.